Being 3 o'clock, we'll call the meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. First item is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public comment, we have nobody signed up. Reed Rayom is here from the library board should we need comments later in the during the discussion. So we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the September 26th meeting. What are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Hart, seconded by Supervisor Lemmer to approve the minutes. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. We'll now move on to item 6A, approval of the September claims and question costs. Those were sent out last week. Supervisor Zhang just indicated that he will be a little bit late, so he will. Chair Gibbs.
I guess I do want to express my thanks to the Finance Department for getting out the register run early and also in the format that it is. It's actually very nice to be able to review and go over all of those items. So I thank them for that.
Thank you for doing that. Any questions? If not, are there any motions relative to the claims and question costs? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to approve the claims and question costs.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Out of respect for others, we're going to jump to item 6B1 next. Unless there's an objection, discussion and possible action to accept state local hazard mitigation grant program assistance. So Lance, are you going to, or?
I don't know, Kim, is Jamie on? Jamie Polly from the Parks Department? All right.
Am.
Oh, she just is.
Perfect timing, Jamie. Go ahead and take it away. And
Thank you
also-
very much.
And Phil is here as well, Jamie.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you. This is an item that I have brought forward to the Park Commission and ERC last week that they unanimously supported to move forward onto the county board. But we had the opportunity, Phil and I saw this opportunity to work with the Federal Emergency Management Association as well as the Wisconsin Emergency Management to potentially look at what it would take to get a safe room here in Marathon County. And I included in your packet kind of an overview of this and an overview of what a safe room is. And it is something that the federal and the state governments are supporting communities looking at these and potentially constructing these for safety during weather events or any emergency where a large number of people would need to take shelter. One of the items we really looked at was like the fair was happening and we had bad weather. Where would all of those people go? Right now, most of them get in their car and they head home, and that's not necessarily the safest. So this goes along good with the feasibility study that we are doing for the ice arena as well, in that that facility could potentially serve as a safe room. There could be other potential facilities within the county that could be built or renovated as well. But we have received word recently that we received the grant award for the scoping study, really just to look into this concept of a safe room and how it could be incorporated into the county. And one option would be along with that feasibility study for the ice arena. So this grant is an award of $300,000. $225,000 is coming from FEMA. $37,500 is from the Wisconsin Emergency Management, and then there's a required local match of the $37,500. We have already allocated $32,500 non-levy funds for the ice arena feasibility study, which can serve as our county match for this. We also have the opportunity to do some in-kind work, which we do know what work that is. So at this point, we're not asking for any money from the county. We feel that we have the county's match already taken care of, but we would need support to accept this grant, and then we would expand that Ice Arena feasibility study, as well as expand an entire study to look at providing a safe room here in the county. The Village of Spencer is one of the closest safe rooms that just was put up in 2019. They did this in conjunction with a referendum they were already got approved for. They received 75% of the cost of their new gym because they made it a safe room, and then could reallocate those funds elsewhere. A facility, if it's going to be constructed, is eligible up to 75% of the cost of construction based on what is deemed for the safe room. So there's some interesting stipulations there when you get to construction, but that would be down the line. That would be another source of funding to possibly construct a facility that could serve as a safe room, multi-uses for the community, very similar to kind of the study and the process that the county's gone through for the forensic center. So with that, I'm just looking for support to go ahead to the county board. This will go in front of them. Like I said, we had support from Park Commission, ERC, and we went to Public Safety yesterday with unanimous support as well to accept this grant and no further allocations from the county to go ahead and do the study.
Christy has a question.
Just an update to the resolution. The resolution itself you have on there will be from, and you'll see that on the packet going forward if it's approved, it will be grant fund, the grant fund under revenues of grant awards revenue, federal and state. And then the expenditure account would be the county parks operation costs, spend category 58292 parks and recreation area improvements for that total amount of the 300,000. So that'll just be updated in the final packet.
Okay, any questions? Chair Gibbs.
Jamie, just a question. So, or maybe that's what the study would do, is would spell out what, if there is additional increased costs on a facility that we build to make it a safe room. Is that what this study, additional study money allows us to do, is understand the difference in cost between what it would be to meet whatever purpose it was designed to, say it was the ice arena, and then design the ice arena to be a safe room? Is that what the additional money funds are used for, to determine, what the additional costs are, what the additional design requirements are?
Yes, exactly. And the funds also cover some more extensive research in order to do that as well, even when it comes to where the site would be, doing any site testing that it would be, getting up to kind of a preliminary design, is all part of this extra cost to really decide if a safe room is feasible and cost effective and desired and needed in the county. And can it be, what will those extra costs be to make a facility meet those standards? Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Follow-up question to Chair Gibbs then is there the possibility then for us to secure funds for the construction of that building at a future date?
From what we've been told by FEMA, that it's highly likely that if they supported this scoping study, that they feel like it's a very worthwhile project in our community, and there's a highly likelihood, yes, that we would be able to apply for a construction grant for funds that would go towards the construction of that.
And if we didn't do this study, would we then be eligible for that if we decided to designate it as a safe house? Or is it so specialized that this is our opportunity to open that door, but we can't open it at a later date?
I don't know that for sure. Maybe Phil knows this more. But from what I understood with the Village of Spencer, they didn't necessarily go through a scoping study. They applied for the construction grant right away, I think, is how they got it. So I don't think this closes the door. I think if we were to do that research and decide to do a safe room, we could still apply for those without doing this. What this grant, though, allows us to do is much more extensive research and scoping that we didn't have in that original feasibility study. So it covers that additional cost to do that further study of this facility or other facilities within the area that we could utilize this grant for.
Phil?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. You did a great job on the overview. A couple of comments that I would add on to it is that the grant period for this particular grant goes from the end of this month until I believe the end of June or end of July of next year. And there are different grants that are available. We're applying for a particular one, and they do come up from time to time. When we first looked at this grant opportunity, it was actually called something different. It was Building Resiliency in Communities, where now we're into the pre-disaster mitigation grant. And they do come around. It just depends on whether or not they're competitive or not. And in this one that we've been accepted for it, and by accepting this grant, it does not obligate us to any future project for building, but it certainly enhances our position for a future project.
Thank you for that clarification. Supervisor Lemmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just question more of a lifelong learner. Can you tell a little bit about the logistics? Say we did get a safe room and somebody were renting something in the park. How, if it were activated, how would it be staffed? Would that be the event people have to staff it, or how do you get permission to actually use the safe room?
Sure. And Jamie may want to comment on this as well. Right now, we're at the concept stage, and we haven't identified those particular items as of yet. But I envision that we're going to have this safe room available to the public. It will have to be staffed, and whether it's by park staff or whether it's by emergency management or some other agency, we'll identify that a little bit later on. And we do anticipate that we'll have staff there in the building. But Jamie may want to comment on that as well, as far as any offices that might be over there as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think when we were talking with our FEMA representative too, that's part of the scoping study is we do have to determine if we had an event in there, we would have a protocol that those events would be canceled and this would have to be used for that purpose, for that emergency management purpose. I have mentioned at a couple of other meetings that there are, if we were in the middle of ice season, let's say, and something was taking place, there would be a flooring that we would probably have to purchase to keep on hand that if we needed it in the event of an emergency, we could roll out that flooring, which would allow people to be on that ice surface without being cold. So that would be part of the scoping study to see what we needed. But I think too, part of it would be to develop an emergency management plan on how it would be initiated to be used. We would communicate with all of our users that this is a safe room in the event of an emergency. We will be canceling all events and we'll be using it for the community safe room. So that's something that we currently do now with some of our buildings. If we have an emergency need for them, like Eastgate Hall, it's not a shelter per se, but we do take priority over if it's an emergency. We cancel events and put that first.
If I can add one thing, and Phil will probably correct me, which is good. But in the event of a disaster declaration, currently, if there was an event that required, okay, there are 50 families that are displaced, and we need a location for individuals, a large assembly of individuals to take place, we do have plans at least in place to talk about whose emergency support function is it to start this. We rely a lot on external entities, Red Cross for certain things. But I think to Jamie and Phil's earlier point, if this were to happen, of course, we would beef up those plans to make sure that, okay, if this site were activated by a local municipality, whether it's the city of Wausau that makes an emergency declaration or the county does to activate that facility, we'd kind of alter those existing plans to account for the specifics of activating the safe room. That would be what my thought would be in terms of planning. Is that right, Phil?
That is correct, yes.
Supervisor Lemmer?
Have we ever done that before? I'm thinking based on the packet, this seems more like a tornado event, and it would be hard, I would think, to unroll a floor. Not that you'd have a tornado in winter, I suppose, but that would take time regardless to get that ready. So
I'll
what
defer
kind
to
of
Jamie on
disaster
the
are we talking about?
the deploying of the floor, but I think that's a pretty normal thing. The activation of the kind of our emergency support functions, I'll let Phil talk about, but we have done some events with our day on staffing event where we've kind of planned for how would we conduct a mass event where, hey, how do we make sure people have food? And we've done some planning and tabletop's not the right word, but we have done some events to try to make sure we're prepared in the event of those sort of functions. But you want to talk to when the last time, can you think of a time when we've had an emergency declaration that required the mass, kind of a,
Mountain tornado?
Yes, sir. It's been a little while since we've done something like that. We've been fortunate that we haven't had to do that. And as the administrator referenced, we do look to outside sources to help us out with that, particularly the American Red Cross. And the way it works is that we have the emergency operations plan in the county, and that's essentially the policy document. Beneath that is the emergency support functions, and we have 15 of those. 2 of those ESFs relate to sheltering, and they're particularly focused on social services and the health department. When we do have a shelter that needs to be activated, we look for those 2 departments to support that along with the Red Cross. But as far as the other tactical stuff, I couldn't tell you until we get to that point.
Any other questions? Not, what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to support the acceptance of the grant and move it to the full board for its consideration.
Subject to the amendments proposed by the finance director relative to the account.
Updating the count, correct.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to the discussion of the 2024 budget and the capital improvement plan. So we'll start, I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard to make his introductory comments.
Sure. My recurring comments that I've made at every other standing committee, and this is actually very consistent with what I laid out when I delivered the budget to this committee and the full board. From the perspective as your administrator, and I think also my sense is from your perspective as elected leaders and the policy body for the county, my sense is this is a status quo budget. The example I've given in other standing committees is this isn't a budget where I can point to anything and say, see this $500,000 increase, this is a new program we started in this department. That's just not what this budget is. This budget is, again, guided by the direction of each of the standing committees and the full board through our budget development process, which was status quo. There were not, through our budget building process, there was a direction for no new positions, no new levy-funded positions. We didn't receive guidance to start any new programs, so the budget is really essentially what we did last year, accounting for some cost to continue items and marginal changes in how we deliver those. So status quo, and Sheriff Billup had that on his slides yesterday in front of Public Safety, is really how I view this budget. Now, that said, there are some very significant changes on the non-programmatic side. So programmatically, status quo, accounting, a lot of change. And still, a lot of things that are changing. Christy just referenced the resolution in the last item and how it's essentially the revenues and the expenditures are being remapped. That's really a term you'll probably hear a couple of times in today's meeting, and certainly when we get to the full board and have more discussions, it could come up again. We went from a legacy system that was nearly 30 years old with 36,000 codes
Chart of account.
to try to mirror the state chart of accounts. So a lot of things that were individually broken out are now rolled up into single items within the ledgers. You'll see it when you get to each of the department budgets, not defendant budgets, the department budgets. There are times when there's dashes in the various lines. Well, that's part of that remapping process. We didn't have something mapped and no revenue allocated to it or no expense allocated to it in 23. There's a dash, or maybe it's the other way. We had a revenue or expense allocated in 23 and now in 24 you see a dash. That's all part of that remapping process. And that happens within departments, and it also has happened for things that used to live outside of departments are now mapped to inside departments, or vice versa. I'll use administration for an example. Part of the capital improvement special project budget now lives in administration, which I think makes logical sense because everyone always came to administration with, hey, I got this special project I want to have done, but I have no money. Can we fund it? So I need to approve it anyway. The flip side of that is there are things that we used to have mapped within our department, grants. We used to have them mapped within our individual department budgets. And now we have specialized grant funds that you'll see. So from the accounting side, I mean, I would totally agree with you. If one of the supervisors yesterday in public safety said, this is confusing. Can you help me understand it? And my answer was no. It's really confusing on the accounting side. But Christy and her team have, working with all the departments, have done exceedingly well to help us keep working through that. That's the difference. Programmatically, status quo, accounting, a lot of change. But again, we're here to give you, the request was for additional information relative to our individual department budgets. So you're seeing a pretty detailed breakdown that probably isn't all that helpful when you talk about programs. But we're here to answer questions, and each of the departments will give a real quick overview of what are the significant changes. Because like I said, I view this as status quo, but each department does have some things that are certainly changes from last year. So our process to this point has been each standing committee, we go through the departments that each committee has oversight of, and they give a couple of those highlights. And then we're happy to answer questions, and it can be as detailed or high level as you'd like. But Mr. Chair, that's all I have. If you want to start with the department, or if you want to provide some introductory comments as well.
Sure, I'll interject. And again, this is we're trying a new process relative to the involvement of the standing committees. And we've, everyone except exec has met. They meet tomorrow to go over those departments of jurisdiction. And we've, talked to them about this, we're trying to build a budget. So we're looking for continued input. So as we're going through this, we're asking them to look at those departments of jurisdiction that they have, and we will continue to accept things. But from this committee's perspective, we will be meeting today to go over some of that. We will not finalize it because we still haven't heard from exec. Our intent is to meet next Monday morning at 8 o'clock for the purposes of adopting the budget for the purposes of publication for public notice for the public hearing on November 2nd. We will have a meeting of this committee on October 24th. We'll be talking about things like our fund balance policy and our how do we approach debt based upon some of the discussions that have taken place and recommendations that have been made by others. The public hearing will be again on November 2nd. Committees can continue to get information into us. We will meet again on November 8th as a committee, and we'll make final recommendations to the board. We will not amend the budget, but rather we will propose amendments to the county board based upon that published budget. And then the other amendments from the county board members can be introduced, considered by our committee, or introduced on the floor of the county board meeting on the 9th. So we've got opportunity for additional input right up until the end, and I expect that we'll receive additional comments where, we've had a readjustment of our general transportation aid that affected the budget, and there will be other variables and other influences from outside sources that may impact the budget that we will need to respond to. Christy.
Kim, could you go to page 95 in the packet? What I wanted to do just before we talk about everybody, all the department budgets, is to get a snapshot of what the architecture of our new general ledger is. I think this is a nice item, and we did do a little bit more mapping on the 2023 to kind of reflect, because we had the transfer between funds, which is actually one of the other things that we were able to finalize is the capital improvements. You'll see that there's 182,000. That is because in our old system we had departments, But then we had two separate departments or agencies. One was called capital improvements and one was called transfers. They were never housed in a department. Now that we have everything living in a department, that I think is a better visualization of what the county administrator was trying to say, is that they had to live somewhere. They don't get to live on their own anymore. So 23 is done. You approved it. That's what it would have looked like from the legacy system into this system. But that I thought maybe a better visual on why we're saying that some of the things moved to some extent, because in the old legacy system, capital improvements was a agency and transfers was an agency. So when you have to give something a new home, those are the homes they went to. Otherwise, I just want to show you the architecture on this. I would request, if that would be okay, the chairman, there are peach colored amendments. Some of them are friendly amendments. The clerk of courts, facilities, medical examiner, and the highway fund are all internal adjustments to their budgets that we felt were impactful enough that we would request that you would perhaps look at those today, because that would make it much easier to reflect those changes within the department budgets. There's also another amendment that came up from Health and Human Services, and that's the one that's in peach for Social Improvement Fund and Debt Service Fund. That's within the packet. That was a request of an amendment from the Health and Human Services to move additional funds out of the Health and Social Improvement Fund to the Debt Service Fund. But there are the Clerk of Courts, Facilities, Medical Examiner, and Highway that we would ask that you may consider those so that we can amend those within the budget. They do not affect tax levy in the funds themselves, but were adjustments within those departments that we felt would be important enough to ask that they make those changes prior to going to the full board.
My preference would be to go through the departments and the jurisdiction of the committee first, and then we will go to what came in from the other committees, and then go from there. So if we could, for
Except
those,
for infrastructure, those came from the committees except for facilities at this time.
right. And facilities is presenting today. So we'll go through, I don't know if there's an order that you'd like to have us go through. Molly, you were up with your thumb drive.
I will just say, I think they did rock, paper, scissors in public safety.
I think they might have gone in order in the packet, so we'll just keep them guessing.
First slide here just shows the breakdown. It looked like it was green, it wasn't. Thank you. Okay, so this is just a breakdown of my staff and personnel and how it's broken out into different funds. So the majority of my staff is, of course, coming out of the General Fund 101, but then each of us have a percentage breakdown based on the work that we do. So some of us are also allocated to our Employee Benefits Fund, 700, and then also the Property and Casualty, 710. And then we have one LTE staff that is funded primarily by the CIP, that she is a Workday resource. And so that just kind of helps you understand our personnel and how it's split between those different funds. When we look at the General Fund 101 here, you see kind of year-over-year increase in revenue. That's primarily due to our cost recovery. So new departments that we are charging this year, Parks Department, ADRC, we are charging them for the cost of services provided, given that they have funds, they have alternative funding sources. Then this 101, so we have year-over-year decrease in expenses. We're no longer going to be funding the Taleo recruiting software. Workday was the replacement for that software, so that was a pretty large budget item for us that's no longer included. We did increase our budget for the tuition reimbursement program. That is a very popular program with our employees. And we did add funding for a classification and compensation kind of true up study. That's something that I've been in front of this committee on many occasions to discuss. We had the full one done last year, and then we hope to true up and make sure that we're still on market in this next year. And then you're taking a look at our employee benefits fund. So this fund is made up of many employee benefit programs, our HRA, our workers' comp, dental, health insurance, wellness, unemployment, flex. So there's a lot of things kind of in here, but this is an in and out, as you'll see, our revenues and expenses align there. So our year-over-year increase in revenues primarily due to the increase in medical and dental costs. That's the increase in the revenues into this, and then the expenses. We did increase our funds for safety and training initiatives, just because that needs to be a priority. That's all I got. Any questions?
Just questions relative to Workday implementation and impacts on your staff and in budget. How are we, are we we're not fully integrated yet or implemented?
We are not.
When do you expect that to occur?
That's a difficult
Crystal
question.
ball?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. I would say, we get better at doing the things that we're currently doing in Workday every day. There's room for improvement and learning, but there are also pieces of the implementation that we have not started yet. So our hope is to roll out learning. That's a really big initiative going into the remainder of this year and going into the next year. So we hope to have that rolled out, hopefully within the second quarter, third quarter of next year. And then we have kind of asset management. There's a whole list of phases that will continue to go on. I can't give you an answer of when all of those things will be complete.
I think IT did a phase 2 presentation. I don't know if remember it was to this committee or to the full county board. So we have phase 2 coming. And the other thing, to Molly's point, is we don't know what we don't know. So one of her big hurdles is going to be, which it won't be, it's going to be awesome, open enrollment and benefit changes for the next year. So I think if we can get through that and do some of our mapping cleanup, we'll be in a really great spot. But we do have a phase 2 coming as well. So I won't have to do that part of the presentation. That's our Workday part, but that's another big one. She's got a huge one in learning, and we have a huge one in recording of capital assets within Workday and Adaptive.
And just to build on what Christy and Molly both referenced, it's not only we don't know what we don't know, but some of this we've not had ever before. A learning management system is a great opportunity for us because automating a lot of the things that have lived in spreadsheets, if they've lived at all, is a real great thing. But it's going to take some effort to get there. We just chatted a little bit about that today again.
So could you give us just an overview of how Workday has helped streamline at least the hiring and onboarding process? Or is that still in the works?
No, it absolutely has. So when an employee comes in as a prospective employee comes in as an applicant, they're giving us all of the information that we need, their personal information, their address, all of those things into the system. That information goes with them from their candidate profile into their now employee profile, which historically they would, enter that in Taleo. I mentioned we're no longer funding that. That was our recruiting software. They'd enter that information there. But then when they would come in, it was a clean slate. We had paper forms, we had things for them to fill out. That information would come into my department. My department would send that information over to Christy's department. Christy's department would hand key all of that information into Kayenta. And then there'd be this back and forth and series of emails. And then as soon as an employee needed to change some piece of information, the cycle continued. So additionally, when a candidate comes in from their candidate profile to their new worker profile, they are automatically served useful information, people to meet. This is the HR department. This is who handles benefits. These are the recruiters. This is the HR director. This is the structure. So they're given information up front to make the appropriate contacts to know where they need to go. The next phase of that will be, here's all the required training for you in the first year, the first few months, and it'll help, again, when people come due for recurring training, that will be automatic. So really just the elimination of the back and forth between Christy's department and my department has been a huge time, effort, and energy saver. And also the reduction in errors. I mean, again, miskeying somebody's social security number. We do I-9s through Workday now. That has streamlined the process because, again, the employee is the one entering their social security number, not me, not Christy, which reduces the number of errors, which difficult.
So there was some talk about going back to Kayenta. I don't think you were serious. So, any other questions for Molly? Not, thank you.
I will then volunteer my husband to go next because I have his presentation on this same flash drive.
All right, so here's a status quo budget from a status quo department. We're a relatively small department. We don't have a lot of fancy equipment. Most of our costs is just associated with staffing. Also, before I get started, you can thank Mike Purner, who's couldn't be here today. He's the one who put the PowerPoint slides together, so you have him to thank for the visual presentation. So generally, the summary, we are not a revenue producing department. Our revenues mostly come from the Department of Social Services, as well as a couple other outside agencies and counties such as Lincoln, Langlade, and North Central Healthcare. Our expenses are mostly employee salary and benefits. All of the other expenses that you see here is mostly our CLE costs for the 5 attorneys in our office. We also pay the bar dues for all of the attorneys in the office. And the luxury item that we have is Westlaw, which is a legal research tool. And I believe that those make up for most of our reoccurring expenses. We also have office supplies and just general items, but nothing very fancy. So. So what's new for 2024 is we started charging for services provided to intergovernmental agencies and enterprise funds. NCHC, we've been charging them since 2020. That's when I first started here, and that's 90% of my job is to provide legal services to them. And then Mike has also, we've also started charging CCIT, library, ADRC, airport, and solid waste department for the legal services that we provide. For expenses, our personnel expenses increased by 3% this year, and we had reduced operating expenses by $9,130. Mike and Jamie did a great job there. They really went through. She keeps track of all of our expenses, and then every year we reviewed them, and this year they went through item by item, and they took out everything that's unnecessary or that we would not be expected to purchase within the next couple of years. Such as, for example, I think we got about 4 new chairs in the department, and so we won't need that for another couple of years. I think they've taken that out, couple other things, and so that comes to a cost savings of $9,130. For highlights for this year and what's new, the biggest change is that risk management is now within our department. We believe that better streamlines what we do, especially when you're dealing with risk, liability, and insurance. With respect to the budget for risk management, most of the revenues come from the different departments, and that's to pay for the premiums. And then the expenses most of them are associated with just paying those premiums. So it's the cost of insurance. With respect to the budget increases for risk management, again, all of the increases are due to the rising cost of insurance, and all of those costs are going to be distributed amongst the departments based on property and personnel insured. For example, sheriff's office is probably going to be a large portion of that because they just have vehicles and other items. Highway department probably as well, and then other small departments like us less so. Do you guys have any questions?
Dan, let me, I don't know if you can answer this, but maybe Lance can, but as we go into that risk management area and we look at our increases in premiums, do we periodically look at our deductibles and relative to risk, and do we evaluate the benefit of potentially increasing our risk? We've got stop loss above certain items, but do we evaluate the thresholds periodically?
I'll let Christy talk on that. The big thing that I think in terms of, maybe it's not a big thing, but one thing I do want to do is similar to what Molly and Christy have done with health insurance, where we go and evaluate what our plan is, whether we make that transition to self-funded or remain in the insurance market. There are other insurance providers for counties in the state of Wisconsin. There are two primarily. We're with one, and then there's the other. It's been a long time, and Christy is a better historian than I as to when we made our change to our current provider and what opportunities we may have to go back out and kind of test that market. But Christy can talk more on any stop loss issues, but that's the opportunity I see. It's not so, I don't know that it's going to save us dollars, green dollars, because the other part of risk management, the part that's going to Corp Counsel is the legal part. The interfacing with our insurer and insurance counsel and anything we have to do with deposition review, that's not really an HR piece. But the other big piece of risk management is the safety training. And that is going to continue to live in HR. And as we beef up our learning management and our safety training, we're going to continue to evaluate what that split looks like. My hope right now is that Corp Counsel is small but mighty, and that they can take on the kind of legal component of that without additional staffing, but we'll continue to evaluate it. I don't know, Christy, if you wanted to talk about the premiums and options we have in that regard.
I haven't put on a risk management area hat for a while, but right now you're currently with a mutual. So the mutual itself will then rate each of the individual members based on their loss and also what their risk profile is. So those are done, I believe, on an annual basis by the actuary. And so they would make determinations as to what your SRR and your aggregate amounts are for the county. And I believe right now for liability in general is $400,000 per specific occurrence and $1,050,000 per year. And then you also have your collision and auto, which is self-insured. And so I think that's, but it is also through MPIC. Too many left, but, and so then I think that also then is afforded through that one. So that's in general how they're rated. So they are evaluated, and they would be evaluated by the people that are holding the insurance, or else the ones that are going to be the sure after we make our deductible specific, and then anything over our aggregate layer.
Any other questions for Dan? Thank you. Who would like to go next? We've got.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will drive from up here, but then when we field questions, I'll go back to the team there. So just want to say thanks to Craig and Troy. They're our project planners. If you don't know Craig Christians, he was general contractor for a couple decades, so he brings a lot of skill sets to the department. Does a lot of the CIP projects that haven't been associated with the North Central campus, whereas Troy has been a department lead on pretty much everything that's happened on the Lakeview campus, whether that's North Central or county projects. And of course, Barbara Parker, she's the one who makes everything we do possible, so it's good to have her here. And she's been really instrumental for us in kind of sleuthing out, how Kayenta was translated. We got a lot of stuff, but being able to dig in there and figure out where the numbers were at and making sense of it at a local level. I mean, finance has done an awesome job as well, but the point I'm making is, like, locally, she's really helped us understand how things have been translated from one year to the next. Just wanted to quickly just show you the breakdown of the facilities team. We've got 37 FTE. I'll talk a little later about, there's an organization we work with or belong to, the Wisconsin Facilities Managers Association. This is it's a really good organization for sharing ideas and seeing how other counties work. But the reason I'm bringing it up now is that coming into the interim director position and in some conversations since, there's been discussions about how facilities has been charged with taking more on across the county as far as facilities go, because we haven't always been involved in other departments like parks, highway, and otherwise. So on the right, you've got the custodian team and their custodial supervisor here and facilities maintenance manager, and then the maintenance techs and HVAC techs with their lead, Steve Bellinger. The point is that if you looked at sort of the benchmark for square footage, how many square feet per person should you have, in an ideal world, or should you start building around? The team we have right now is doing yeoman's work, and the fact that, you could make arguments that they've been doing more with less, and certainly that's true with the maintenance techs who've been down a couple people, so we're hoping to fill one of those soon. But the reason I'm mentioning it here is, like, as we start to move forward, and this is more of a 2025 discussion, but I want to make sure I talk about it. The numbers I'll look at for the benchmarks are kind of like, if you have additional square footage and increase a footprint in one direction or another, we'll need to make an argument with this committee and the board about adding capacity so that we have enough people to actually take on the work that we've been tasked to do. That being all said, they do an amazing job, and it's been a really informative year for myself in this position. Just want to tell you a couple of notes of things of how we work within the department to try to build up the team. Just at the top there, we have a millwright apprenticeship through North Central Technical College. This gives our maintenance techs a 4-year path to kind of build themselves as far as their skill sets, kind of go from somebody who's a really strong team member going out and working on things to someone who can be fully independent. And as they work through that program and meet goals sort of on a pass-fail basis, they're all able to increase their wage rate within the schedule. And so that gives them an internal path, which is important to me because it allows you to build capacity within the department and then, give people paths to follow, that's beyond just a sort of traditional step, one step to another through year to year. Because we don't have one on the HVAC side, and there really isn't one statewide, I'm going to be meeting with our HVAC team to build one that would mirror the millwright approach. We're not doing that. It's not in place now, but the idea would be to come back and make a similar argument to say, here's the path we can pull HVAC techs through. It would be specific to Marathon County's needs, and it also helps, we've got some folks who are, I'm sure, I can't say it for 100%, but are surely looking to retire someday soon. And these individuals and pulling them through that kind of a path will help reinforce the capacity within the department so the county doesn't lose any ability to address needs in that area. The Wisconsin Healthcare Engineering Association, Troy, I mentioned he's the regional president. That's really important because anything and everything you do on the North Central campus and work with them is heavily regulated. And so our department needs to know, how do you do it? And how do you meet the code and make sure you're doing it the right way and making sure the contractors are doing it the right way and have those conversations. So Troy has been instrumental in making sure that happens. Obviously, North Central has their individuals too who he works with, but it's helpful to have it in our department so that we're not doing something we shouldn't do, just for lack of a better way of putting it. I mentioned the Wisconsin Facilities Management Association. This is currently, I think, 14 other counties. who are actively working within this. We went down to a conference a couple weeks ago. It's really just a way to share ideas, see what people are doing, and give people advice based on our experience. So maybe this equipment is more maintenance intensive and costly than the other. So if somebody doesn't know, they can get that insight. And that is a good segue into the entire reason I'm mentioning all this is that A, it builds capacity, but also it helps the department ensure that we're saving the county money and not spending on things we shouldn't, or making mistakes that then we have to go back and demolish and rebuild, that sort of thing. Looking ahead, I'll quickly note, we're still looking to expand the umbrella, like I mentioned, in terms of taking on more. So I've been having sort of informal conversations, some formal, depending on the area, with other departments. I think our relationship with Highway is pretty robust right now compared to how it was in the past, so that's been going very well. Jamie and I have had some really good conversations, both about operations and also how Workday is going to change some realities for both of our departments, and how might we look to leverage what Workday is doing, and how we, how our operations work to maybe spread things out in a way that better suits what each department does. So that's to be continued, but we're laying the framework, and we'll eventually start pulling things together into the sort of vision that Administrator Leonard has for more of a public works approach. It would probably end up being less hierarchical in terms of public works and more horizontal on an org chart, just because of statutory authority and things like that. But the point I'm making is that we're having all the right conversations now, and those are going to continue and provide the same sorts of benefits to the county moving ahead. Just two examples I can give you is that we can do things in-house that some departments don't know, and we can do it cheaper, and I would say better. There's another thing you can, if you have a department who has an issue and they need to resolve it, they don't have the exhaustive knowledge that Craig and Troy and others in our department have about who are the vendors who really knock it out of the park on this. And so, hey, you need to contact this person to develop your budget. This is the vendor you should really contact first. I mean, you obviously have to work within the procurement ordinance and whatnot, but it's insight and from the lived experience that departments don't always have. And so we've been able to be a resource in that way. I already mentioned the square footage, but I just included it here to reinforce that this is sort of how I'm going to be looking at that question of how do we take it on and what do we need to do it. Just a quick note, if you've been following the CIP discussions, you know that, the project list that came to you had already cut projects out of it before it got to the potential project list, and then we deferred others in order to get the budget down to a point where we didn't fund a lot of projects and left a little over $3 million in ARPA for the committee and board to kind of determine what to do with it. More budget specific. In terms of revenue, the department's primary revenue source is rental of buildings and property. That's going to be everything from state agencies and others who are renting space in the courthouse, over North Central campus. There's mechanisms we use to take advantage of grants as well to have that feedback into the budget. And then also it includes things like county-owned towers that maybe communications entities have something on, so that we get a fee from them as well. There are additional opportunities out there, especially as sort of the footprint comes into greater focus. I've mentioned it before, but the Lakeview Professional Plaza, when the sanitary lines and things there get addressed, that building is really ready to go with lots of space that other agencies and entities or departments could use. I tried to just separate the budget into bigger chunks. This is the one, in terms of personnel costs, we don't really see this one or work within it too much. One thing I did do is I moved our lead HVAC person who was named the lead actually into a lead position within the personnel budget. So that meant a small increase in pay, but that was in line with how those sorts of positions work. That ultimately will come out of any pay for performance money at the end of the year, but that was a good thing to address early on and just get that out. It was something that was long overdue. But other than that, things here are basically built around the budget assumptions that we receive from the board. But you see that, out of the total budget, 2.6 million of it is wrapped up in personnel costs. As for large sort of non-personnel costs, I highlighted a few things here. The sundry contractual services, we've had discussions about what does sundry mean at other committees. It's really sort of contractual services you receive from other businesses that don't neatly fit into a different category. So it's kind of a catch-all for those services. As you might imagine, facilities is working with a tremendous number of vendors in the community and across the state and region, really. So anything that doesn't neatly fall into a category for Workday will fall in there. The other one is obviously the utilities, so water, electric, sewer. That's a large portion of the budget. These are, we've had lots of discussions about putting together energy audits, things like that, to better understand where we're at. But in terms of rates and things like this, it's largely out of our control. So we have to figure out ways, how can we try to mitigate things on the front end with projects or, different approaches. Where, it could be if you had problems with, repeated flushings of toilets or running of sinks in a jail, for instance, we could put pieces of equipment in there to mean that you can only run that for 15 seconds at a time and then only every 5 minutes. So it really prevents an issue from happening, just with a quick little fix that attaches to the sink and the toilet. So that can mitigate water use. Same thing with the county does have an energy policy. Molly sent that to me earlier in the year. Our teams kind of looked over it. There are things that mentions kind of like when you have occupancy standards within buildings, there's really a range of temperatures you have to maintain for occupancy. And so, I've kind of joked about, the stereotypical cranky dad who turns the thermostat down, put on a sweater. That's not something that, we could save money doing that, but we're really not able to do that because of the regulations. So, I think the policy is something I've been looking at and we need to review and refine. We've had conversations about adding other projects to mitigate use just across the board. And so that includes, things like switching to LED lighting and using focus on energy programs within any of the projects that we do that have the ability to tap into that program. And we do a lot of that work to make sure that we're, continuing to build upon that so that as the rates do what they do out in the world outside of our control, we're doing what we can here to control things that are within our ability to do so. So again, that's these larger costs, roughly $2.5 million. The balance of the budget, the broader breakdown in the packet is mostly supplies and supports, permits, things like that, sort of a little more mundane maybe aspects of the departmental budget. So I want to just quickly touch on utility rates and review, because there's lots happening in the world when it comes to any one of these. I'll start with natural gas. A couple years ago, the costs increased dramatically due to the war in Ukraine. There was a tremendous amount of global pressure. The U.S., to make a long story short, effectively replaced Russia as the primary source for this fuel. So then now in essentially 6 years, the U.S. went from being sort of a marginal player in this trade worldwide to being the global lead exporter for this fuel across the board. And so the reason that's important as far as volatility or just trying to understand the market is that it's not as simple as it might have been in the past or straightforward. Not that it was all super clear, but now you have global influences all over the place. How is stagflation in China, meaning that they're not using as much natural gas. All these things you have to kind of account for in how you're watching the markets. Similarly, how much is being put into storage. So just so you know, there was a tremendous amount of fuel being put into storage because of the pressures being put on the global market. Now you've had some warm winters, and that storage has created a supply issue where now the price, even though we had this, heat waves and all these other things that were huge gas users for energy production, the storage in the ground that had been in there prior to all that is not allowing that spot price on the market to increase the way you might think. So what gas producers are doing is they're shutting down wells. So they shut down the wells to decrease the supply actually into the market. And I'm not going to get too exhaustive, but I just want to give you a sense of how kind of weird it is to have to really pay attention to all these things. And we do have resources that help us understand this, webinars and regular sort of educational things to give you kind of quarterly looks at how things are shaping up in those markets. The spot price, which is what the price day to day in the marketplace, that, as I mentioned, that's been stable. That's been a benefit to us because Whereas we had to put $400,000 or $390,000 into the budget out of ARPA to account for that wild increase in price, that has gone away to the point that the market price has been stabilized despite all of the things trying to, increase it. We get our gas, we buy gas through Constellation. It's a third party who's been very helpful for us. They have a program called Alpha 365, which in short, we put half of our gas volume into. That allows you to capture all of the lows in the market and then mitigate the highs by half. And overall, it's an algorithm that allows you to have a price guarantee that's never more than 1% over market average. So it's a neat hedge in terms of our purchasing strategy on half of the volume that we go through, and then the other half is still on spot price, which as long as it stays where it's at, we should probably stay there. Two other things. I've been talking with Johnson Controls about doing a countywide energy audit across facilities. There is an MOU associated with it, but it's not some sort of guarantee that Johnson Controls is going to get anything out of it. It's more of a procedural piece from their point of view, as I understand it. But ultimately, you get that energy audit out of that process for free from them, and then it can identify projects that we could look at pursuing in the future. Similarly, Constellation has a program called Pair AI, and that is another analytics program so that you can get sort of real-time understanding of your use. And it's a suite of things that you can get into the artificial intelligence and whatnot to get a much better read. This would be on gas use, of course, but nevertheless, those are two tools I'm looking at embracing in the coming weeks. On electricity, I think there's a lot of movement in the area, but we live in the WPS world, which is good for us because their projection moving ahead is a flat rate or a potential decrease up to 2.9%. Whether you realize a 2.9% decrease is still a question mark, but that's what they're bringing to the Public Service Commission, whereas other utilities across the state generally have some sizable rate increases that are largely a reflection of their investments in renewable energy. The last one here, the Wausau Waterworks, and I'll premise everything I'm about to say here too, is that ultimately it's my responsibility to get this right, and I didn't, but I'm going to explain to you how I didn't. And hopefully you'll have a small degree of sympathy for my plight here. But as you see, the Wausau Waterworks rates increased 78%. And that's across the board, not just the water. The water was roughly 65%. We looked at different accounts, but I think 65% was the mark that the water went up. Then the other elements, the other services we get through the waterworks, as a whole, that account went up 78%. So that was not on the radar for the 23 budget, the one we're in. So this year, for the latter half, there's a $150,000 increase in the funding needed to account for those increases. Now, by virtue of me serving in this interim role, we've got plenty of funding to cover that. So 23 is not really an issue. 24 is ultimately not an issue. I have, put together a plan and sent it to Administrator Leonard. I won't say it's the best plan that anyone's ever come up with, but it does get you through the year. But ultimately, that was a $250,000, just shy of that increase. That does include utilizing the position vacancies, obviously, because that's, personnel costs are a large portion of the budget. There are other off-ramps, but, to me, it was important. And like I told Administrator Leonard, I'm not going to come to you with a problem and no solution. So at least I've led off with one solution. Now, I'll also say that I reached out to all of our utilities as we built the 24 budget, and it was on July 3rd that I called the waterworks. And Terry Larson, if you're out there, thank you for all your help. They've been very great. But the reason July 3rd is important is that the effective date for the rate increase we weren't aware of was July 1st. So when I asked the question, what's the rates increase for 24? Terry told me, which is true, there are no planned rate increases for 24. So in my lens of developing a budget for 24, there's no rate increase for 24. So had I asked maybe 3 days earlier, I might have got a different response. Or had I said, are there any rate increases whatsoever at all? So asking a better question, I would have got a different response too. Nevertheless, it was just an unfortunate series of whatever you want to call it that led to that miss. The other thing is that through discussing things, we learned about this last Wednesday, so you can just it's been a flurry of activity. to figure out all the different workarounds and also to learn that while the Waterworks doesn't have real-time information yet, they do have an online portal which we can get into to integrate all the accounts into one spot. And the reason that's important, and again, I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, but just so you can appreciate sort of the sense of things, the Waterworks has 3 billing cycles, and our facilities are spread across the community in a way that we hit all 3 of them. So you have 3 different billing cycles across effectively 3 different rates this year. So then when we were putting together our projections, we had to take info from 22, info from second quarter 23, info from third quarter, the lived experience, and then also look back to fourth quarter 22, and then figure out where the quarters hit and spread it all across and do the percentage increase to get the number that we got. So if that sounds convoluted, it was for us, but I certainly could say we really understand the ins and outs of this a lot better than we did, say, 6 days ago. So that being said, there's no 24 rate increase on the horizon, but the Public Commission does discuss those if they're entertaining them. They put studies together, as I understand, to figure out what they would be and when they would be implemented. I'm sure that the Waterworks did communicate this at some point. It never ran across my desk, and that's not to say that that's their fault. That's just the fact that somebody could have seen it as mail that was directed to the previous director. I don't really know it, but it doesn't effectively matter. At the end of the day, there was money that was not put into the 24 budget that we had to come up with some plans for. Jumping to the kind of the end of that budget breakout in the packet, the supplies and support. So once you get past those large non-personnel portions, and I did it in order, so if you're scrolling through the packet, this is the very end of that departmental budget. The 317,600, that's the small capital improvement fund. So we have 2 funds, one for smaller projects within the courthouse and then one for smaller projects at North Central, things that wouldn't rise to the level of an actual sort of CIP type project, hence small CIP. And then just a note to show that when people say status quo, I think it really, for us anyway, you look at what's those 2 big chunks I went over earlier, that's 90% of our budget. So there's really not a whole lot left to account for everything else when it comes to supplies and fees and permitting and all these things. Just a quick note on the capital projects fund. In the packet, there's a larger breakdown, and if you're looking at that and wondering, what is this? What it really effectively is that spreadsheet of projects that we've gone through at this committee and at county board, translated into the Workday and Adaptive system. So you can go through each of those lines and find a direct connection from what you see in the packet today to the spreadsheet that was presented before. So the 24 CIP projects and rolling stock funding really start getting going at the bottom of page 30 in the packet, or used to be page 30, I think it still is. But then also, just as a note, the fund, like any other, because it's projects that haven't been fully approved as adoption, as a part of the budget adoption, that is subject to change. There are positions related to CIP project. Those would be Craig and Troy in the back. And then Molly already spoke about Kim's salary coming out of that because of the Workday piece. And the last thing I'll say is that I didn't put the grant fund sheet on the presentation, but when you look at that and you're wondering what's that $4 million, that's effectively the ARPA funding that was allocated by the board to be spent on a North Central Healthcare campus. The highlights and looking ahead, I put this there mostly for the public who may not dig through the entire budget message, but if they're curious about the facilities department, they can see what we're up to and where we've been. And that is the presentation. Thanks for listening.
So as it relates to utility costs, one of the discussions we had when we were talking about an energy task force was whether or not we can look at an actual reduction in either kilowatts or therms. I know that we have the potential to close off some of our buildings while we open up new footprints, but do we have any way of tracking our utilization so that we can look at opportunities to realize some savings and reduction in energy use? And, you were talking about Johnson Controls, but there's also, does Focus on Energy do energy audits, and do we have some opportunity to get redundant audits that might give us some value and look at different things?
Yeah, I mean, those are, the two I mentioned were just two that I've been looking at more recently. If through Focus on Energy, we could look at what they can provide too, and, I think having all three of them looking at the use overall would help. Even WPS has a piece of the gas in terms of transport, so there's a lot of layers to the pricing structure. For things like water, we've broken out accounts, especially on the North Central campus, that used to just be one large account that's been broken out into separate meters. So for something like that, we can get some more sort of real-time data on and track that. Some of the HVAC, some of the systems we have in place can generate some reports, or at least data to plug into a report. I think the challenge, I mean, there's ultimately a way to do it. You would want to put, and correct me if I'm wrong back there, but you can put meters in the line. They might not be there now, but you can put meters into a line, say it all comes to a central point and then gets spread out across North Central campus. And that's how electricity primarily goes through the central utility plant. But from there, you could look at, okay, where is it going, put a meter in a line and figure out, okay, this block of this building is using this much, and then fold that into a data platform. And that Pair AI analytics platform I mentioned is really built on that kind of concept, where you have real-time data based on a lot of metering across, past the point of entry, let's call it, to get the data that's not aggregate data, but more focused in terms of, an area of the building or an area of the campus.
Other questions, and I think we'll be having some additional discussion with you relative to specific projects later, unless you want to do that now. Christy?
Deputy County Administrator / Facilities Director Homan, you want to go back to page 112? Just wanted to bring up one of those things we were talking about, mapping. The utilities, natural gas, are housed in the 905, but it was offset by $390,200 in ARPA funding. So that's a mismatch in the budget, but the levy for the department is absolutely correct. So those are just some of those examples. So that is not available for the utility budget in 2024. It was not built in as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. Also, since Barbara Parker's here, a lot of the work and unsung heroes that helped both Molly and our departments are people like Barbara. They actually have made sense of all the chaos, and she's come a long way in trying to help us interpret everything, and we really appreciate her help. And there's tons of people like that in all the departments that have really, really made this successful. So I want to thank her.
Okay, any other questions at this time? If not, thank you. Connie, do you want to go next?
All right. I'm the Marathon County Treasurer. And in my department, I basically am tax collections, and I pretty much, we have 61 municipalities, and I make sure that everybody is paid out during tax time. We also provide land records with CPZ, because that's where our property lister lies. Work really close with them to make sure everything is good to go for tax season. Majority of my job right now is, part of our highlights is to go after tax delinquent properties. So we are very active on that as well right now. So, and I also do the investing with our county funds. The 2023 highlights is basically property taxes. We make sure that they get done and the tax rates and everything are going through in November. So that's what we're working on right now. The tax delinquencies that we're working on is we're going after a lot of people that haven't paid their taxes for several years. One positive is they are coming to us and paying in full. So we're hoping not to have to take their property. They can hang on to that and continue to pay their taxes. We do have payment agreement options, but that doesn't always work for everyone either because they are high payments. So we do try to provide what we can to them for options to pay their taxes. We are also working with CCITC with phase 2, we're trying to get Ascent integrated with Teller, and that will work better. So we lose additional operations right there with using more equipment. So Teller will actually work with Ascent when we collect tax payments, and it works with Workday. So we are working on that, and we will be, that phase 2 will go into 2024. And like I said, the tax deed, our biggest insight right now is the tax delinquent properties. So we are working on that very diligently right now and with Corp Counsel.
So I noticed a significant reduction in revenue associated with interest on taxes and penalties on taxes. Is that an anticipation of a reduction?
Yeah, as long we're trying to get residents to pay their taxes, which would reduce that. So if they're more accurate and they're paying their taxes on time, that reduces that interest and penalty on those.
So do you know what our outstanding the taxes are right now? I know we're trying to work on expediting the taking through the NREM process and other things which will freeze the value. We won't have increased interest or penalties, but do we know what our current backlog is?
As far as the dollar amount or the number of properties?
Well, both, if you have it.
I do not have that. I know we're around 400 properties right now that we're going after, and I know it's over $1 million. But I don't have exact number.
Is that $1 million for the year, or is that $1 million? What is
In
that?
general. Well, it's a little over $1 million in general of the properties that we're trying to take. Those are the properties that are delinquent.
So we have properties that are delinquent, and we buy the tax roll, and that $1 million is associated with our purchasing of the tax roll and paying off the other entities. Do we have a cumulative of the properties that are delinquent? Some of them have been delinquent for multiple years. Do we
Yes.
have a?
No, and in our legacy system, that was a calculation that we had to do separate because Ascent didn't equal Kayenta, or the old system didn't. Ascent doesn't equal Workday yet. So we still have to look at those kind of between the two systems to see if those numbers we can get.
So I'm looking at that from the context of as we try to move through the process of acquiring and then turning around and selling those through the surplus property and other things that Deputy Administrator Holman's been working on with the Corporation Counsel, you, Connie, and others. Do we have the ability to, is there an opportunity for us to capture that revenue, and where will that revenue go for the 2024 budget?
So once we sell those properties, we have to be able to, if we sell the properties, those proceeds, some of the proceeds do go back to the owner. So we can only accumulate what we have in tax base.
But again, with the new law, but we've accumulated in some cases 10 years of back taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So we have our fees and other things, and basically that goes through Kim as a clerk. Where do we put that money in our budget? How does that reflect it in our budget? And
For 2024,
right,
what because it's going to be new, so theoretically people will be paying their taxes on time. Therefore, your penalty and interest are going to go down on taxes because you've been working with a lot of payment plans, and so that would mitigate those costs. The revenues are less, but yet people are paying on time, which to us is a much better economic indicator of how well the county does. And then that's where the mapping's a little different, but if you see the other miscellaneous revenues and other capital equipment, which really should be up in the other miscellaneous revenues, that's where we were kind of trying to figure out going forward with a new process where some of those revenues that we would accumulate go. So we're trying to phase out from the old way of doing things to the new way. And the old way was a spreadsheet that we listed all of the properties on to
So-
try to figure out the tax deeds.
let me try to, so as we go into the year, we have this accrued
I'm just going
liability of past taxes, interest, and payment, the payments that we've made to the other local units of government. So we've accrued. Let's say that I'm delinquent, I'm 10 years delinquent at $6,000 a year in taxes. So I'm 66,000 plus interest and penalties that have accrued on my property, and all of a sudden the county takes it. You take it through the NREM process, it goes to Kim, she turns around and sells it. So let's say I'm at $100,000. It's not based upon, I haven't necessarily accrued interest and penalties in 2024. I have accrued them over a period of time leading up to that. When I realize that sale, or when I sell that through the surplus property, where does that money go?
Well, it comes out of accounts receivable, correct? It comes out, the back taxes comes out of accounts receivable.
So we're reducing our accounts
We're
receivable.
reducing our accounts receivable. Because they're accrued.
Which affects our bottom line, but not necessarily our budget.
Correct.
So as I guess I'm trying to lead to a position that is one of the issues that this committee may want to deal with as we're moving into this. Is there a desire on our part as a county, from a policy perspective, to dedicate those funds to a specific purpose or purposes?
Yeah, that's certainly a question. I just wanted to provide, well, the best I can is historical context. You asked a question about kind of essentially, in my mind, what is our collection percentage? The delinquent, how many property owners are delinquent? What's our collection rate relative to taxes? And all we have right now is historical context for the reasons that Christy talked about. We did have a discussion, Connie, Christy, and I, about can we start reporting on that collection percentage. Historically, it's ranged from as high as virtually 100, 99.9, to 97% when I'm looking through past budgets. And again, we were able to do that. Christy can probably provide more information, but that was a historical calculation. So it's, despite the large backlog we have, I don't think we're anywhere significantly outside of past practice, but it has ranged from, again, about 97% up until that, up to about 99.9.
Kurt?
I appreciate that, but I think there's a significant change that the state legislature imposed that may affect that recovery rate. In what I mean by that, in the past, if we sold a property that we had recovered and it sold for more than we had debt against, that was actual additional revenue that would skew that percentage of recovery, whereas now that excess above and beyond what we've already accrued as accounts receivable, that has to now go back to the taxpayer property owner. And so I guess my point to that is, I think we're looking at one property right now that was sold, and we're trying to calculate out how much of that has got to go back to the taxpayer, which then is going to affect the amounts of actual recovery.
Yeah, I don't know if the way that we reported it historically, and this is, again, I believe we stopped doing that in about 2012 or 2013, that manual calculation, but at least as I read it, and perhaps my interpretation is inaccurate, it is the collection percentage for taxes levied in each year. Mm-hmm. So our percentage that we would, of the taxes that were levied in that year, the percent that we recover is still a very high number. I mean, that makes logical sense, right? The vast majority of people pay their taxes on time within any given tax year. But I think your larger point is absolutely true. How does the change in law affect our, not our budget, but our overall financial position with respect to accounts receivable and what we can actually continue to hold?
Don't get me wrong. I appreciate all the advances that we've made and all the work that all of the people in this room have done relative to trying to expedite the process. I'm trying to look ahead and saying if we have if we reduce our receivables, what's our policy relative to the income generated in that reduction of receivables going forward? Because we really haven't built that into our budget. And we can deal with that post-budget, but I would hope that we would get that policy in, and we will need to, because of the changes in the state law, we'll need to go back and look at where is that excess, how, what is that excess amount, and how do we deal with it? So there are some issues and just the ongoing challenges of the new legislation and the Supreme Court ruling. So more work, Chris. Any other questions for Connie? Kurt?
Just one other thing, one of the discussion points that's been had as it relates to that change in state statute and the Supreme Court ruling was that, and we're starting to hear rumblings of such, is a potential class action lawsuits that may generate a potential liability as to back properties that have been acquired by the county and may have exceeded the debt that the county had, and so the sale may incur a liability moving forward. So we need to understand that that's a potential, and more likely than not that it's going to happen in the future.
On a positive note, on the county treasurer's office budget, we did get the state's shared revenue numbers, so that is probably out of all the non-status quo items. Sales tax, there's $13 million in the general fund. There's another $3 million that's been budgeted in the debt service fund, but the state shared revenue, those are the numbers of 7.3 million opposed to the 5.9. Those are the numbers that have been provided to us by the state of Wisconsin. So on a positive note, that's a great impact to us.
Any questions for Connie? Thank you. Kim, do you want to go?
Sure. I'll just pull it up and then I'll. So I work with Kurt to do the county board budget as well, so we can start there, and I think Kurt may have a couple comments as well. This is basically, like everybody else, this is a status quo budget. Just a couple things to point out. The salaries and wages does include a partial staff member in my office that is allocated to county board. So that's just a partial thing. So that's supervisors and a partial supervisor in my office. Some of the things that down towards the bottom of that page, it looks like, okay, we have a $9,000 amended budget for this year with only $1,300 having come through to this date. One of the things to note is that credit card payments are not updated in this budget as of mid-September. This is only reflecting to June's credit card payments because finance, when they reconcile the credit card payments, they always run a couple months behind. So a lot of the big expenditures as far as lodging have not hit this yet. So this really is not a time accurate portrayal of where we are. So a lot of the summer conferences that people attend, WCA, none of that is included in this $1,300 yet. So we did increase it a little bit next year because we will have potentially new supervisors who get to attend the WCA conference in September, and the county would be paying for all of those supervisors to attend. We don't have to pay for their registration, but for their hotels. So that's why that was increased just a little bit. Meeting expenses, when we have new county board orientation in April, we always have a little bit more expenses associated with that meeting, so that's why that was increased over this year. That's kind of an every other year thing. So that's about it for county board, unless there are any questions that Kurt or I could address.
Any questions relative to county board?
Okay. And county clerk's office. So this is one of those interesting ones where we've had 4 FTE positions allocated, but then when Lance gave his budget message, he mentioned that one of those positions was not funded. So that's a little bit of a discrepancy there in that salaries and wages category. If you look at revenue, one of the things that jumps out right away is really an anomaly in the $184,000 revenue line from other general government fees. And you may be wondering, okay, you've got 184,000 sitting there, but your budget was only 31. That is the sale of that tax deed property that we had this year. So we have that big chunk of money sitting in that line item, but it's not going to stay there. So that really is not a true revenue that we brought into our department. That's one that we're working on identifying, returning some of that funding back to the former homeowner there. Basically, not much else changed. There are a couple things with 4 elections next year. We had to beef up a couple things as far as costs for ballot printing. We did increase our revenues. A lot of our election costs we do charge back to the municipalities, so we get some of that money back, but not all of it. So that's why the revenues increased there a little bit as well. That was the main thing with increasing costs for next year. One thing that down on the bottom of the page with machinery, equipment, maintenance services, we've got $90,000 budgeted for this year with nothing spent to date. That's because the bill that we pay for our annual maintenance contract for all of our election machines doesn't come due until the end of the year, so that hasn't been paid yet. So no, we don't have a $90,000 line item sitting there that will not be spent. It will be spent, and we'll have some increased fees for that next year as well. So, any questions on that?
So how many, you'll have 4 election events?
Yes, we'll have 4 elections next year. 2 of them, the April election with the presidential preference primary will be a huge election. And then, of course, November with the presidential election.
Both of them. All right, any questions for the clerk? Not, thank you. Christie?
Sure.
All right. Every department is going to have a cost center. We also have funds, so we've got Corp Counsel runs a small insurance company called the Property Casualty Fund. Employee Resources, they get the Employee Benefit Fund, which is a small benefit fund. It's an internal service fund. That's what the government word is for them. So they get to run those, and you'll look at those at the fund level. And Finance Department, because we have to assign all the funds to somebody, I get debt service. So I get all the bills that we have to pay out to others. So first thing we'll do is look at the debt service fund. On the debt service fund, we have the total amount of principal and interest that need to be paid in the expense line item. That's $7,333,100. The breakout is bond principal. Those are the bonds and notes that are outstanding for Marathon County and due payments next year. The bond interest, a little over 2.5. And then we do have aid to county force loan. Those are the payments, you'll see that you have offsetting forced fees to pay those out as well. So all of the debt is incorporated in that debt service fund. We saw in County Treasurer's Office, $13 million in sales tax. The additional $3 million, making up the $16 million in total, is used to offset annual debt service payments. The other items that we do have then are your $150,000 in interest income. It's actually miscellaneous income, a little bit of revenue generated by the interest. And then local department charges is $2 million that would be coming in from the North Central Healthcare Center for 2024 payments. Giving you a total tax levy this year of $2,553,100. That is the budget that was forwarded to the County Finance HRFC Committee. And that is where it's established now. Later in the packet, you will see an amendment that was brought forward by the Health and Human Services Committee. And what the effect on this budget would be is that a request for a transfer out of the Social Improvement Fund balance would go to be a other financing source into this budget to offset some of that levy. So the levy would be reduced by the $1.5 million, and that's coming up later in your packet. That has to come to this committee or to the county board for approval, but we wanted to let you know that that would be the impact of it. But to make it less confusing, which I've just made it more confusing, currently this is where the budget is at this point. So that's the debt service fund.
So maybe I'll stop you there. So in 2023, we took $3,750,000 out of basically the fund balance.
Right, and that's
to reduce the levy increase, and that's not reflected in this year. And instead, the proposed budget has $2.5 million going on basically the levy in increase. And I think that one of the questions that has been raised and generated with the discussion of the Social Improvement Fund is what is our best use of fund balances and others. And again, this is a good time to interject again the discussion we had at the beginning. Did you hear back from Kristen from PFM by any chance? We're looking at talking about our fund balance policy. How do we approach debt in this budget and going forward? And that discussion will take place on October 24th.
Yep. I have a meeting scheduled with her tomorrow, and she's going to try to attend in person, if not virtually, on the 24th.
So I think we want to just have a reasoned approach so we don't have ups and downs relative to the levy with debt service. And the debt service that we've incurred to date has been with generally a 3/4 vote of the county board approving the project. So I think we need that long-term policy in that discussion.
So this is your debt fund as it is today. And then here's the finance department. The difference in our budget is that we do charge out local departments and other departments, and we have for a while with some have separate written agreements, some do not, for all the accounting and payroll services. We are called the fiscal agent for some of those outside agencies, and that would include City Parks Department, ADRC, Solid Waste. Trying to think off the top of my head, I have a spreadsheet, but we received those. The other item that we did have is that we did have through 2023, as part of the Workday implementation, we did have temporary personnel that were able to help us provide support to get that project up and running, and we had utilized that through contracts through Upworks. We had brought back some of our employees that have been able to help us either manage the old legacy system to keep it going until we were able to close that off, or we needed specialized services for Workday. There are no additional contract employees of that nature. We did always have a temporary amount for our audit times and that. So that has been eliminated, but the funding from those did come from the CIP, so that also reduced that salary amount from previous years. Otherwise, our budget is pretty much status quo. The things that do go up in there are employee salaries, benefits, and another big line item for us is accounting and audit services. Typically, our cost of audit will go up about the same price as CPI, so that's been incorporated in there. We do charge out to the other funds for services that are provided exclusively for their audit work. And the only other one that is, there's two other ones that are kind of considered the finance department, which are support for other agencies, and which is right here. Support for other agencies are basically the ones that are in the county administrator's budget message that the Marathon County levy support for things such as ADRC, the North Central Healthcare Facility, Mount View, family care supplement payment due from the county based on the agreement from 2006, the IT department, and other various items. And then the last one is a contingency fund, which is later in the packet. The contingency fund is at $800,000. That is the amount that it was for 2023, with zero amount being paid out so far. And of the $800,000, the county budget resolution will specify $50,000 is put aside for the finance committee's discretion, and the remaining $750 is for the county board's discretion to spend. And there is a need for that to be separated because that way it gives the finance committee the ability to use that for small emergencies or small items that they would need to manage without having a full county board approval. And that's the finance ones.
Any questions for Chrissy? If not, thank you very much. And thank you, Administrator Letter, and all Deputy Administrator Holman for the work on the budget and preparing it. And thank you for your staff's role as well. Anything else, Lance, that you have from the departments that report to us?
I don't think so. I think Christy kind of started with her comment about, within the packet we do have, and it's up on the screen right now, the kind of what I'll call housekeeping or custodial requests that we have to address some of the issues that have come up since I delivered my proposed budget to this committee. But other than that, we're just here to answer any questions and try to assist this committee in gathering information you might need. You already made reference, Mr. Chair, to engaging our financial professionals to bring them here to perhaps add some value to the discussion relative to what I'll call the development of a debt plan. But other than that, we're just here to answer any questions.
I did put the amendments in the packet that had come through. One was presided by Health and Human Services, and at the discretion of the chairman and the committee, if these are items, the clerk of courts, which was approved by the Public Safety Committee, the medical examiner, the facilities and capital management one we didn't discuss, and highway GTA final amounts, if you would like to make those proposed amendments today, I would have them incorporated within the budget for you on Monday. It would also help me get the publication done, but that's totally up to your discretion. But all of those have been written up, and then also the one from the Health and Human Services Committee, which actually does transfer money between funds, which is slightly different than the other ones that are basically a cleanup either within the general fund itself with no levy impact, or a change to the final amounts that were received by the Highway Department for GTA, so that, but they also then will continue to have their expenditures at the same, so that we don't have lower funding in future amounts based on expenditures at a lower amount than budgeted in previous years.
All right. Any discussion? Chair Gibbs.
Well, can we take the amendments that are cleanup and take those one at a time and move those through, that we could take them up, and then also then start to discuss the amendments that are offered by the various committees?
And then I have one other amendment that was proposed by a supervisor relative to the capital improvement
Okay.
plan as it relates to deferring a project.
Okay. So I guess if my preference would be, we look at the cleanup ones that are offered internally, and then take those one at a time, and then move to the ones that are offered by the various committees, if
Why
that
don't we
makes sense.
start on, consistent with that, why don't we start on page 98 of the packet, Amendment 2, is for a process, if that makes sense. So Amendment 2 deals with the issue of the general transportation aid came in lower than anticipated, which has happened in the past. And this is, Christie reached out immediately to Jim Griesbach and proposed a solution, and this is it.
Timing is everything. If you take a look at the email on the next page, Highway Commissioner Griesbach provided this information while you were deliberating on the Tuesday of accepting the budget. So with that, that's why we just wanted to have this make the change, and he agreed to the amendment as presented.
And again, I think that the past practice before a few years ago was when general transportation aid went down, we cut the budget. And the general transportation aid is derived on a 6-year average. And so we got into this continual spiral going down, and our general transportation aids have basically been frozen. There's a commitment, supposedly a commitment of 30%, and I think we're at 19%. With the state has not been honoring its commitment relative to funding county roads, which means that we've got to look at levy and other sources, including the vehicle registration fee, to pay for that.
And one of the revenue sources is an increase in the sale of highway equipment and property. But as the infrastructure committee met, the highway department is looking at upgrading quite a bit of those. So we believe that with this sale, even if they're older vehicles, that increase we didn't budget that into the budget. So we believe we're comfortable with that increase on the sale of highway equipment and interest income due to the fact that hopefully we're in a better interest rate environment in 2024.
Any questions or discussion? Chair Gibbs.
So if I could summarize, basically, we received notification from the state saying that our portion of GTA was $116,000 less, and we've adjusted that by a revenue of $50,000 increase in interest income and $66,000 increase in sale of assets. With that understanding, I'd make the motion to approve the amendment.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the amendment will signify by saying aye.
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 All of those opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So we will then move on to the Amendment 3.
Yep, and this one is I apologize to Clerk of Courts because she had, in her budget meetings with County Administrator, and I was in there, she had reevaluated the ability for her to increase some of her revenues, but also at the other end, she knew that the legal services would be more, so she had requested an increase to the court fees and cost revenue, sounds like an expense, of $150,000, and that also then would serve to increase her legal service expenditure line for the same amount. So the request is tax levy neutral, but more accurately reflects what she feels is the 2024's budget for that revenue source and the increase in the legal services. Again, she and Public Safety had talked a little bit more about how there are some changes to indigent attorney fees and other fees that are appointed by the court, but this is what would do to more accurately reflect those two lines in the budget and does not increase or change any of the tax levy within the county's budget or in the general fund specifically.
Any questions relative to this adjustment? If not, what are your wishes? And this is an adjustment with no impact on levy.
And the Public Safety Committee did approve it. I did put this committee, and they, so I wasn't sure if they were, but they did forward it to this committee as well.
I'll make a motion to approve amendment number 3 of the proposed 2024 budget.
Moved by Supervisor Hart. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Chair Gibbs. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of adoption of Amendment 3 will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Amendment 4.
Amendment 4, what day did you find out the water rates were increased? Last Wednesday? Okay, an hour before I got that email, I had an email from the medical examiner because when she reviewed her final numbers for her operating budget and personnel, there was an increase over what she anticipated or needed to budget for several items and an under budgeting of one of her other personnel items. So I'm going to bring that up. And she says, these are significant in her budget and what should they do? And so we were going to talk about those. And then next up, independent of this conversation we were having, was the fact that the water rates were going to be anticipated to be higher. So it wasn't because these two things are related, they just were emailed within an hour of each other on the same day. So we were trying to offset some of the issues with the water utility and lower to a truer cost of personnel cost in the medical examiner's budget so that would, and they're, both departments live within the general fund. So the tax levy amount and the expenditure amounts within that fund would be equal. And that is why this kind of is a two-part solution to two problems that really don't have any negative tax levy impact within the 2024 budget. And that's how this amendment came to be. And again, the Public Safety Committee reviewed it yesterday in regards to the medical examiner side of the budget.
Are there any questions? Any questions? If not, what are your wishes? What are your wishes? Anybody wish to make a motion? Chair Gibbs?
Make a motion to approve amendment number 4 of the proposed 2024 budget by decreasing the medical examiner's overtime budget by $65,486 and decreasing the expenditure of the medical examiner's personal budget special activity pay of $17,500, increasing the medical examiner's personnel health insurance budget by $20,000 and increasing the utilities in capital and facilities and capital management by $62,986.
There a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of adoption of Amendment 4 will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. And
Thank you. And For reference then, on the page 95, you'll see the ones in peach. Social Improvement Fund, Debt Service Fund, that's Amendment 1 that we have not discussed, but those other items will be amended, and we'll change the adaptive budget so that will reflect these changes for your meeting on Monday.
I would request that this be adopted as rather than 4 separate amendments. I think what we're doing is amending the product that we're taking to the county board, and we're not going to take all of these amendments individually. We'll roll those into, in essence, a substitute amendment, a substitute budget going from the administrator's budget to the finance committee's budget and presenting that to the county board. They'll all be incorporated.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
So other questions, and again, relative to Amendment 1, in so much as I think that there are some long-term issues, I don't want to say that we shouldn't vote on it. I think we would benefit from the discussion with PFM on our policy, and while we're publishing a rate based upon the action we take next Monday, we still have the ability to change anything between now and the 9th of November. I'd like to save that discussion until after that presentation and discussion with PFM. Is there any objection to doing that, Chair Gibbs?
No, I think you bring up a great point. I think one of the things that literally, we are struggling with in understanding a long-term financial stability policy for the county is how do we, the previous boards have approved the borrowing of roughly $100 million, and we have a obligation of $7 million worth of debt payment roughly per year, rather than taking this 1 year at a time, I think we need to have a long-term plan on how do we manage the property tax rate in light of what the debt service requirement is, using that and looking at that strategy. And I think, it will do the board well in the long-term sustainability of that debt service to have that discussion with PFM and set up a policy where we structure that rather than looking at a short-term period. We know that the debt service is going to be over the next 18 years or longer, and so we need to have some kind of long-term strategy of how we deal with that, especially when a significant portion of that debt is with a entity that we are an 80% member of. Understanding their capabilities and is in some cases limited by outside influences. I think that we have that long-term discussion and long-term strategy is something that we need to actually solidify in a policy. And so for those reasons, I'd make a motion to postpone discussion or postpone action on the proposed amendment number 1 until after the meeting after the HR Finance Committee has received that information from PFM.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to postpone.
I would like to hear from the author of the resolution as to the thoughts behind before we take the vote.
Is the author on?
We should be clear that we're not taking a vote on the amendment. We're taking a vote to, is this require a vote?
This is a motion to postpone.
We're postponing to a date certain.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not like we're tabling this indefinitely.
I'm sorry, and what is that date certain? Is that the 24th or the 19th?
It's the meeting following the presentation by PFM.
The meeting following or the meeting of?
When is the presentation by
I would say the
PFM?
meeting following.
So that would be taking it up on the 8th
Correct.
of November, no later than, or
No later than.
No
November-
later than.
No later than November 8th.
is that the understanding of the 2nd? No later than?
But the amendments are due to HR Finance by November 6th. So is this going to be
one of
considered?
this would be in the queue.
Okay.
So this would be, yes, Hart, Supervisor Hart. So Supervisor Marshall, the issue would be before us at a date certain, and we could either take it up on the 24th of October after the presentation from PDM or at that 8th meeting, but it will be taken up by this committee
Thank you.
based on that motion. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion to postpone will
Make
signify.
a comment.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if Supervisor Marshall was asking me to come in or if someone else.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, I would note that we had a plan to a new budget guidelines, a new budget process. And in that budget process, the committees were making, reviewing and then making proposals to the HR Finance. So by delaying this, you're effectively not following that process. So, thank you.
I respectfully disagree with that. I think that the committee has the ability to make recommendations to the county board right up to the adoption of it. And Supervisor Baker has raised a number of issues that I think we need to address. One is, what do we do with the fund balance policy for the social improvement fund on a short-term and long-term basis? How does that come in? How are we addressing debt? We are not ignoring it. The request from the committee was for us to evaluate it. I think that evaluation takes place in a more transparent basis if we have the information from PDM, our financial advisor, on how we approach that issue. I don't think the delay is not an effort to kill, but it is an effort to enlighten the committee and the county board of options and potential consequences. Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll reiterate that too. This social improvement fund is, I think, part of the social services department, and that's a department that I hold very dearly because I'm on their board. But I don't fully understand the amendment and all of the consequences of it right now, and I'm not comfortable making a decision right now without a lot of the information, even outside of what's been discussed so far here. So I really think that we need to take a look at this and see what the full impact is on this. So I would agree with that.
Any other discussion?
Just a comment, Mr. Chair, from Supervisor Marshall.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
We had known a long time ago that North Central Healthcare, or months ago anyway, that North Central Healthcare was not able to fulfill the debt obligation for the borrowing that was done on their behalf. And yet we didn't ask for an assessment from PDM until this resolution came up. So it seems the timing is more about the resolution than about the debt.
Chair Gibbs.
Well, I respectfully disagree. I think what I, in my motion to defer, was to have a long-term strategy on how this board and this county manages a $100 million debt with a $7 million payment, roughly, or more than $7 million payment going forward long-term, rather than continually, as we did this year, using reserves. We did with 2-point-some million of reserves. And now we're going to use another $1.5 million of reserves from a different account. But what I want to be able to understand is what's the long-term strategy to be able to cover that debt, to also be reflective in how that has impacts on the property tax that is going to be assessed to the taxpayers in Marathon County. So my reason for postponing it has nothing to do with wanting to kill this motion. It is with understanding how we are going to be set up long-term successful for debt service on $100 million worth of debt and not have a negative impact on the taxpayers by the tax rate fluctuating significantly if we continue to use reserves on a one-time basis.
And one of the things that we continually hear is we need to run government like a business. And I think what we're trying to do is develop those policies that would allow us to be, allow us to do that. And ultimately, the decision will be made by the county board on how we go about paying for debt. But I think I appreciate the fact that we're having this discussion. I think that the social improvement fund balance grew with the thought that it was restricted, and we found out that it wasn't. So we have some opportunities, but those are one-time opportunities. And how do we deal with one-time opportunities relative to ongoing debt obligations to the county? I think that's why we're trying to bring PFM in to help us understand the interrelationship or where we're going, sort of that financial plan for managing debt. So any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion to postpone will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no.
No.
That motion carries, but not unanimously. Supervisor Baker has put a request in to me, and we can, relating to the capital improvement fund relative to delaying or removing the funding for the chiller at the library in this year's KIP. Supervisor Baker, if you'd like to comment.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Robinson. So I made this proposal in a good faith effort to provide information to the committee, to the HR Finance Committee, and to the county board as a whole in advance of the budget meeting in November. It, was sent to the press and received a substantial amount of publicity. And I would ask for a little lenience in discussing that. If not, that's fine. So the intent of this resolution was not to discontinue the library. I did not, or this request in my email, I did not say that in the email. That's how it was reported, is that I want to discontinue the county library system, which is, advocating for that, and that is absolutely not true. You can read the email that does not say that. That's how it was represented in the press. What I did say is I'd like to have a discussion about a policy discussion. And there are a couple reasons for that. One is right now, the way the system is set up, each of the branch libraries and municipalities for those libraries own their library building, and they're responsible for the building and the HVAC system. So the HR Finance Committee was asked earlier in the year to finance a replacement of a stained glass window at the Mosinee Library branch, and was turned down because they did not own that library, because we don't own that library. However, in 1992, the city of Wausau gave the headquarters, which was at that time, I presume, the Wausau Branch Library or the Wausau Library, to the county. And, we are now responsible for the complete maintenance, building, HVAC costs. The city does not contribute, and a number of individuals and supervisors, both citizens and supervisors, have said that that's not equitable. And in my opinion, the county should pay for a good part of that because it is a headquarters. I propose 50%. The county would pay 50%, and the city would pay for 50%. I propose that at Triple ED, and Chair Robinson, said that the building was given to the county, and that is true. However, the deed says that the county has the right to give that building back if we decide not to continue funding the library system. And I'm not advocating that we don't fund the library system. I'm actually supporting a tax increase from last year for the library system, so that that count. That obviously, if I'm trying to abolish the library system, I wouldn't be advocating for an increase in the property tax that's dedicated to that. So, but we have the question about, is it equitable that should the city provide part of that? We also have a large amount of citizens who have attended many library board meetings, and there was close to 1,000, like 950 signatures collected on petitions. And so it is a reality in our county that not everyone is in agreement on what the community standards of the library should be. So a question was raised by me that, if Wausau ran their library and met their community standards, and the branch libraries ran their libraries and had their own library boards, would that help? The people would have a safe place for their children to go. Other people would have a place where they could go and, read the books that they want. And I don't know if that's a good solution. I don't know. I don't even know if I would advocate for that. I just raised the question, is that worth considering? And, I don't know if the municipalities would be interested in that. That obviously would be a requirement. I don't know if we could come up with a way to continue to fund the entire library system within that structure. So that would obviously be a requirement that, libraries continue to fund. And I don't know if the state statutes even allow that. So I'm not proposing that we do that as it was reported. I'm just saying, let's have a policy discussion. If we can't have policy discussions on our board without people going to the press and having, incorrect information printed, I don't know how we can get along as a board. You should be able to make a suggestion to have a policy discussion without that being, raised in the press that this is a statement already decided. That is not, it's not helpful for our board unity. So basically my request is that we take out the $2.8 million in ARPA funding out of the budget process, because I felt it would be contentious. I was right, way beyond what I expected. And we have, I'm hoping that would be still, put back into ARPA at a later point, but we don't know. We've been told that one of the reasons that we'd like to do this is because the water costs are going up. But we're using water chillers right now, or water cooled chillers. We would be going to air cooled chillers. There would be an increased electricity cost with air cooled chillers versus water cooled chillers, I would expect. I've had facility manager / deputy administrator Holman is going to give us those numbers. He's going to do the best to get those numbers, but we don't know those numbers right now. They have not looked at those. So we don't know what this change is going to add to cost. If Wausau is participating in the Wausau Library, they own a water utility. maybe the water costs internally are not the same. You know, what's the marginal cost of adding more water? Perhaps Wausau would not want to go from water cooled to air cooled. Apparently, at the time that the library was designed and built, that was considered, you know, the ideal way to go. Many people in renewable energy are going to water cooled systems, like ground loop water systems or other type of water systems, because it saves energy. So to me, it's not clear that, you know, that we're quite ready to make that decision. And also, you know, I was, like I say, in a good faith effort to try to make the budget process smoother. I think this will be contentious at the public hearing. It will be contentious at the budget meeting. So I thought we could remove it and, you know, consider it later. Unfortunately, it's contentious now, taking it in or taking it out. But that was the motivation behind it, was to actually make the budget process less contentious. You know, it didn't work out that way. So basically, thank you for the time to explain that.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Supervisor Baker, if he would be willing.
Why don't you direct it to the chair and Supervisor Baker can answer it?
I can do that. I want to know if in all these discussions, anyone has approached the city of Wausau on this, because I think in proposing a amendment, it would be wise to have the amendment fully vetted before bringing it forward, and that would be seeing if the city of Wausau is even interested in doing this, especially if we're looking to make a decision on a policy that hasn't even been set yet.
I want to just caution us, the issue before us is not the ownership of the library and how we deal with the branches. The issue before us is the capital improvement plan and the timing of and payment for the chiller. So I want to be careful we not go off on items that are not related to the budget and not agendized under the open meetings law. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong.
You good?
He's got the one I must add this
Your
one.
mics now.
Chair Robinson, I think I can answer the question without going off into a non-agendized.
All right, go ahead.
The answer is no. You know, this is just the very beginning. We have not made any decisions related to that. We have had no discussions related to that. The idea is that by taking this out and separating it from the budget, that would give us time to have those discussions. So none of that has occurred. And, you know, I don't even know if I'm advocating for that. Like I'm saying, this would just provide us with additional time to make a decision.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first off, I guess I would appreciate hearing from facilities management, the professionals, as to the opportunities and the challenges with a delay of this potential project, and the cost long term. I think the clear understanding, you know, and Supervisor Baker points out that the branch libraries are owned by the local municipalities, and in this case, the headquarters for the library is owned by the county. And so when you make the assertion that there's inconsistencies, I don't know that that's 100% accurate. I think the accuracy is that the county owns 100% of the facility, as in any situation, that then the responsibility of maintaining that facility ends up being on the county. No different than the facilities that the Stevens Point campus in Wausau Center becomes the responsibilities of the counties. And so I don't know that there's inconsistencies. The analysis is that the branch libraries are owned by those municipalities, but the headquarters is owned by the county. And so the thought to even look at somebody else paying for something that the county owns, I guess I'm more concerned about what the opportunity costs and opportunity challenges are in delaying of the project.
So I think that's an invitation for Chris and crew.
Okay, and I'll just stress, obviously this is more of a project-specific point of view, and I don't want to suggest by offering up the information that was in the packet, which isn't comprehensive yet, or what I'm going to go through now is in some way saying that, there's so much momentum behind this that it has to be done and influence the decision you're having about the other questions. So, but that all being said, as far as the project itself goes, I mean, you're really looking at something that falls under the umbrella of facilities being charged with go out and fix things that are broke. So as a building, the equipment we're addressing is at end of life. We spent this year working on the design of putting it all together. And just in terms of process, the construction documents are on the verge of completion. So the design's complete, the construction documents are on the verge of completion, and essentially that puts the project in a position to be ready to bid. So there is a long lead time on some of the equipment, so that would affect project completion. Like if you waited a year, then you can't purchase the equipment until the funding is allocated. So if you bought it in 24, it's going to take you a year or more to get some equipment in. So it's not going to actually be completed until 25. And if you wait till 25, till 26, those dates are important because, as I mentioned, if ARPA is in the conversation, then you need to have a contract in place by the end of 24, regardless. So you then spend it by the end of 26. As far as bidding goes, that you wouldn't want to bid this out anytime other than like that January, early February timeframe, or if you had to, probably early November, just because of holidays and hunting and everything else, to get everybody on the same page and get a contract in place in time. Having November and December. If you did it in the middle of the year, you're gonna find that contractors' calendars are filled up. So just by virtue of availability, costs go up. And then some vendors we work with are saying they're already booking out into 24, which is somewhat unprecedented for them. I mean, that'll be more of a broad impact just in general, but it's a factor. As far as costs, again, when the costs went up through the pandemic and through inflation, the new floor isn't coming down. And so those costs aren't going down. What you're seeing now is, in addition to owner contingency, project contingency, you're seeing separate line items coming into project budgets just for inflation. And so if you looked at this particular project, if that inflationary piece would be, based on a couple other projects I looked at in that 2 to 3% neighborhood, you're looking at $50,000 to $100,000 roughly in additional costs just because of inflation, which has softened in the industry, but it's still there. And of course, the other costs, labor and such, would be going up year to year as well. So it's just something that would need to be accounted for. Let's see here. Just a real quick, Supervisor Baker is correct. He had reached out about the energy costs. So the information on a substantial water increase at the bottom, that I included that because it was new information and it really just shows the scope of the increase. Now there would be an offset to what you're seeing there in terms of electric use for the new project. I've been crunching a lot of numbers with the engineers on this in the last couple of days. And I got to work through and iron out some other wrinkles, but based on preliminary data anyway, it looks like there's still going to be annual or in aggregate over the life of the project savings generated through a new project. The other thing is, it's not just the chiller. I mean, it's called the chiller project, but it's all the air handlers, generators, lots of associated equipment. So the generator, for instance, it's an old model. You can't get parts for it. The second floor air handler is currently being problematic. Our lead HVAC tech is limping it along. But should that fail, the parts, depending on what breaks, parts could be hard to get. Or if it was a catastrophic failure, then you're looking at 12 to 18 months to get a new one. So obviously the new project is planned on replacement. Even now, I talked this morning with the lead HVAC tech, and they had planning on replacement. They wouldn't have had to do as exhaustive sort of end of year maintenance on some of this equipment, but because there's some uncertainty, they're going to do it anyway, just because if we need to limp it along for whatever reason, they'll have done the work to have that in a position to do so. Overall, the systems, and this is again from our lead HVAC tech, it's currently working all right. I mean, the technology is very dated. When I asked him, like, how long could you push it? He thought that, 1 to 2 years you could probably push it. But the thing about the project is that 1 to 2 years is folded into the timeline already. We already know that we're 1 to 2 years away from project completion if it moves forward as is. So a delay, a shorter delay wouldn't have as much of an impact, but a longer delay obviously would start pushing that to a point where the 1 to 2 year piece starts to intertwine with different parts of the project. The water cooled versus air cooled. The thing from a facilities perspective is that a water cooled system is more labor intensive than an air cooled. Essentially, air cooled systems you really only have to go after once, maybe twice a year, like a heavy pollen time of year. Whereas water cooled, there's chemicals and all kinds of things you need to go in and check on like a weekly basis. And so you can easily have like just labor hours wrapped up in addressing a water cooled system just by the nature of it. Again, there's pros and cons to both, but moving towards an air cooled, one of the considerations was that if that were the new system, then you would free up time because you wouldn't have to be going there every week and checking on all these things. And if something went wrong, wrapping up half a day or a full day addressing the issue. That's not to say that an air cooled system wouldn't have issues, but from his point of view, the water cooled takes up more of his people's time when it comes to looking at the county's footprint. Another piece of the new project versus the status quo is that the current system in place does not service the third floor at all. So that's why there's no occupancy. There hasn't been any like specific plan set forth for what's going to happen there. The new project would have built in that capacity to address fold the third floor in other words. So one question I've also asked as part of the sort of energy analysis and project cost is to say, if you replace the status quo, and this is a question to the engineer that I've been working with on this, is what would it take to replace the status quo and include the third floor? So it gets closer to apples and apples, because it's not really apples to apples trying to compare these two systems. There's components, but there's a ton of variables involved, from the weather to, humidity, lots of variables that are hard to account for, but the number we can bring back to you will be a high level sort of, it'll be a well thought out estimate. I don't want to say rough because, we're putting a lot of time into trying to figure that out. The other thing just about the building in general is that this addresses a huge, a lot of equipment throughout on the HVAC side. But regardless of what approach you take, there's still going to be a request in the next 5-6 years because the controls throughout the building are going to need to be replaced as well. So that's not something that we're addressing as part of this conversation, but it's just, again, part of, if you looked at it as a fixed asset, that's another thing on the list for whatever the building's ultimate disposition is that will be coming forward. I think that's all the high level stuff. I'm not sure what else I've missed, if you got some things.
Even as, we changed out the air handlers, we're going to be going with newer technology than what was from 25 years ago. You got VFDs that'll be going in there. We'll be able to take advantage of, focus on energy dollars on what we're putting in there with all these new equipment. So there's going to be some payback from that also. So.
When do you think you could have that information?
We've been shooting emails back and forth ever since Supervisor Baker had made the request. So, and because it's sort of opaque, at first looking at it, like how do we figure out something that gives that sort of analysis? I think, by your next meeting or, within the next month for sure, we can get a set of that. I mean, it could be as soon as Monday. It's just, I sent a couple other emails that I haven't heard back on today with some specific questions, again, to try to get that comparison piece a little truer and then show, okay, the water rates did increase obviously quite a bit, but at the same time, the electric offset from the chiller's use of electricity would be this. So then, based on that analysis and the project costs, this is what your annual savings would be. This is what your overall life life of the system savings would be, and then try to boil the question down to: do you want to, if there are savings, do you want to have new system, new technology, to Craig's point, et cetera? So, and free up time on the labor side for the HVAC technicians. Do you want to do all those things or not? And that would be kind of the core of the question, I think, at that point.
Okay. Any questions for Deputy Administrator, Facilities Manager Holman? So do you draw 2 paychecks now?
Nope, I just pay for water bills.
Are there any questions? So what
I have a question.
Go ahead, Supervisor Baker.
So when would we need to have the contracts placed to not, because we're not talking about delaying the project by a year because it's not a budget item, it's an ARPA item, so that could be discussed, that could be approved at any time. So, if we went out for bid in December, when would those contracts typically be let? Thank you.
So if the contract, we're bidding in January, so if it was this year, we would have the contract in place, soon after budget approval. If there was a delay, then the ARPA deadline is really what kind of forces your hand there. You'd want the contract in place one way or the other in the end of the year. The reason I say the end of the year is because you're getting much closer to the calendar and the planning that contractors are out there doing for the following year. Whereas if you allocated ARPA funding in the middle of the year, then you're going to experience some cost increases, again, just by virtue of fewer contractors bidding on the work. So I hope I'm answering your question, but either way, the end of the year is where you want to have the contract in place, and then you bid it out immediately in January so that you're hitting the time that you really want to hit.
Again, the ARPA deadlines are, we must encumber the dollars by December 31st of 2024, and we must expend those dollars by December 31st of 2026. I know that early in the discussion relative to ARPA, I know Milwaukee County raised a number of concerns relative to their ability to complete capital projects within the timeline, given the amount of lead time. So it's been the issue of capital projects has been one that people have been trying to accelerate, not to delay. The second issue relative to timing is, while it is ARPA and could be considered out of the context of the budget, if you bid the project at the wrong time of the year, you will significantly increase the cost of the project because the contractors have a full slate. You want to get them bidding when they're still hungry in order to save dollars for the county. And those are all factors that need to go into the discussion.
Yeah, and one last thing is just to say that should it be delayed, even if we bid it in the middle of the year, we can work with the people on the project team and figure out what would those numbers look like based on, reliable construction indexes and things like that would help you, figure out what would the additional cost be, so that those in a conversation would know, like, okay, now the project cost is this because of XYZ factors. So we would definitely be able to put that work in and bring the number back if that were to come to pass.
Chair Gibbs.
The other one point, I guess, that I struggle with, several years ago, we gave direction to administration and to facilities to look at 3 categories of property, and that was end of life and potential new projects and stuff that absolutely had to be emergency, needed to be repaired. And the reason and the rationale behind that was clearly this. We understood that delaying projects, as we had done historically, had effectively cost the county tax money long term. All we have to do is look at some of the repairs that we had on the facility, the library facility on the roof and the roof project, or some of the repair projects that we had, emergency repair in the jail facility. And so we provided direction to look at end of life. I think facilities have done a great job of looking at where there's challenges with the current system, where there's efficiencies in long term, and move forward with a proposed project. And then just one other point, and that is, whenever something is transferred, we have jurisdictional transfers with highways and sections of highways. Village of Marathon, for example, is receiving a jurisdictional transfer of a section of Highway B in the Village of Marathon. But it's after the Highway Department has brought that structure up to code, if you will, and has brought it into pristine status. So I'm not against having the discussion about whether or not we transfer back to the city of Wausau the building. But that being said, I am a little discouraged about delaying a project that clearly has maintenance consequences, long-term consequences, and cost consequences to the taxpayer.
So there are two options. One option would be to wait for Deputy Administrator Holman to prepare that information and consider this request at that time. The other would be to take it up today. Supervisor Baker, would you be okay with delaying that and placing it on an agenda at a future meeting?
Yes, that would be fine with me.
Why don't we make sure that that is in our queue, and Kim will make sure that we agendize that at a future meeting. So that'll give them the opportunity to collect that information. Thank you. Any other motions at this time? Any other motions? All right, then that will conclude the discussion today. I think we're going to continue to look at the budget items, but Monday morning at 8 o'clock, this committee will meet to go over the resolutions for publication. That does not end this committee's or the county board's consideration of it. It just sets the budget for the purposes of the public hearing, and we can amend it at any time or offer amendments that would amend it through the 9th of November. So anything else? Again, reminder of that meeting. I think we've got a lot of items for future meetings. If there is nothing else, item 9 is in order.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you.